I know that you've been helping a band of coaches with their attitude towards their pupils and how they can best win their confidence and help them, which I thought was a really interesting thing to have done with this band of quite select coaches, of which we had one or two on our William Fox Pitt coach Zoom the other night. And I would love you to give us a little bit of a broad sweep, as I say, poacher turned gamekeeper, of what it is you suggest to these coaches might help them help us, all of us sitting in this gallery listening to tips for strengthening our resolve, finding our confidence when it lacks the most, and all such things.
Well, firstly, thanks, Lucinda, for inviting me onto this. It's a huge privilege. It really is. And thanks also for letting me plug my business in the very first question, because you're right. Centre 10, I set up a few, 4 years ago now. God, time flies. And really, it came from a very simple premise that I could spend all the time that I had helping riders, and that would be lovely. That would be great. But actually, the work I do with riders is, to be honest, relatively insignificant compared to the day-to-day work that obviously coaches do. Yourself being one, and inspired me in the early conversations that we had. So I thought, actually, it's always been a bit of a, I don't know, taboo in psychology, but I think perhaps psychologists have wanted to protect themselves from anyone else doing their job. But I kind of feel the opposite to that. I kind of feel if someone else can do your job, then you should let them, especially if it's a coach, especially if it's a parent, but basically the people who spend every day with riders. So the principle was to try to distill down the sort of principles of psychology that help people to perform at their best. And the other thing, I suppose, implicit within that is that for me, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, Lucinda, but for me, psychology isn't simply about what we do when we turn up to competition on the day. It's also about how we train. It's about how we conduct ourselves in every day. My background's in the army originally, and we had to do these horrific things called room inspections in the army. And it got a lot of people thinking, why do we have to do this stuff? It seems so outdated and sort of, outdated. We had to kind of have all our clothes folded up in a perfect A4 size. We had to have our boots kind of obviously shined, but in exactly the same position with the laces done up. We had to have our window open 1 inch. If it was any more or any less, we'd fail. And so a lot of people say, well, why do you have to do this? And really, it's to teach you discipline from the inside out. The idea being that if you cut corners on the little things, you'll cut corners in the moments when it matters the most. So I kind of, to answer your question, go back to your question, Lucinda, I kind of thought, well, the people that are there every day with riders are the coaches. And I think that they're the ones that reinforce. And similarly, they're the ones who can dismantle the work that you might do with riders when it comes to psychology. So that, I guess that was the kind of initial premise of it. And it's kind of ballooned into something far bigger than I ever imagined.
And what sort of approaches, I had a little bit of information of Helen Bell the other evening. What sort of approaches are you helping coaches engineer towards their pupils? I got a little note here from Jess Cox saying, my Centre 10 coaches fab, have also done the Centre 10 rider mindset course, which is also amazing. So that's a good start. But what sort of things are you encouraging the coaches to understand? Because it might be sort of not completely in my own understanding of teaching. I'd be really interested.
Yeah, okay. Good question. And thanks, Jess. I'm delighted that you've had a positive experience. I mean, we're totally committed to making sure that our coaches kind of really do stand themselves apart from the psychology point of view. There are three areas, Lucinda, really, and this is the kind of training that we put them through. There are three areas. The first is focus on yourself. I'll come back to that. The second is focus on the rider. And the third is focus on performance. Now, focus on yourself is really all about, it's all about knowing what you bring to the party. It's not pretending that there's a right or wrong in coaching. It's recognizing that actually you will be doing the best service to your rider if you show up as the best version of yourself. You know, as a coach, you're performing as well. You're managing your emotions. You're having to kind of manage your tone. You're having to ask questions. You're having to observe skillfully. So there's a lot that's going on in your performance. And just because you're not sat on the back of a horse, it doesn't mean to say there's not a lot going on in your head. And actually what I've noticed and what our coaches were amazingly open about actually when we first started this was that what's going on in their head could just as easily be the kind of insecurities that might go on in a rider's head. You might be worried, am I doing the right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Am I, can I do this? Do I have the right kind of repertoire here? There are an infinite number of questions that you could ask as coaches. So that's why we do a lot of focus on self. And the goal of that ultimately is to help them understand their own personality. So we do a lot of stuff on personality. So help them understand their own personality so that they can feel confident being the best version of themselves. They don't have to feel like they need to be something that they're not, because that will disrupt the relationship with the rider. So second part, focus on rider. In a way, it's kind of the same, but now what we're doing is we're projecting all that we've learned onto the rider. So what is it about their personality, for example? How can we profile a rider's personality? And what does it say about the way that they walk a cross-country course, for example? If you're really extroverted, for example, you'll want to talk all the way around. If you're introverted, you'll want to kind of think about it and quietly make decisions before you offer them out loud. Well, that can be a huge problem, as I'm sure, and I'd love to hear your experience on senior teams, Lucinda, but that could be a huge problem if you've got a team where you've got one person who loves to do this and the other person who'd rather just everyone was quiet and they made their own decisions. But what I've noticed is that when people understand personality and where that comes from, people are a lot more accepting. And if they're more accepting, then they don't allow negative emotions to get in the way of what they're there to do. That's just an example of focus on the rider. We talk a lot about mindset and understanding where the rider's mindset comes from, but we also talk a lot about your questioning style. And you know what, actually, this is where I think our coaches have really benefited from the last year or so, if I can put it like that. It sounds like a bit of a sort of crude way of putting it, but doing sessions off the horse. And it's something I've always wanted to explore with coaching, but actually, can you enhance a rider's performance by working with them off the horse? And of course, and I really hope most people would say the answer is yes, because when you're on the horse, you're focused on the doing, and actually your focus is narrowed down to the very specific things that you're doing in that moment. Actually, when your brain learns when you're out of the saddle, it's in those moments when you join the dots. You think, what happened there? Why did that happen? And that isn't a function of what happens when you're in the saddle. That's a function of what happens when you get out of the saddle. And if no one's there to help you join the dots, you actually lose a lot of the potential learning process. You also learn a lot in your sleep, by the way, but that's a slightly different topic of conversation. But if you don't get a good night's sleep, the brain doesn't necessarily wire and connect the dots from the day before. And the final, sorry, I realize this is quite a long-winded answer, Lucinda, but the final section,
keep it up.
The final section is on focus on performance. So we've done focus on ourselves, focus on the rider, focus on performance. And really that's about the kind of process that the mental and I suppose the physical process that gets us to competition, that allows us to perform at our best at competition, and that that allows us to come outside the other side of competition, analyzing what we've done and being better for it, no matter what the experience. So focus on performance is much more about the performance process, which is kind of sits separately to the coach and the rider themselves. I hope that's answered your question, Lucinda.
That's lovely, but you did just mention something that I'm going to have to take up, because it's our dyed-in-the-wool approach in my young day when I was in the team. When you talk about the introvert and the extrovert riders, of which you're absolutely right, there was often quite a serious mix. I remember so well how does that work? In a stable in Lemoulan, where we'd all collected to discuss the cross-country course on Friday night, Saturday being the World Championship cross-country course. And we had a process of going through every fence, and people would say what they thought about that fence and how they were going to jump it. And it usually went pretty well. And one or two people said, oh, yes, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. And suddenly we had somebody sobbing in the corner. And sorry, I don't know quite how to stop. I told you I wasn't very techie. And one of these poor 6 riders was actually in floods of tears when asked why. It was because I hadn't thought of any of these things. I wasn't going to do any of them, and now I don't know what to do. And this poor girl, on the eve of her World Championship performance, was really in a real tizzy, because that's not the process she'd ever gone through before. She'd done really well and got to the top of her game, doing her own way and her own thing, understanding her horse, and then suddenly she hears all these other people coming in with what they're going to do because their horse has something different to her horse. And it just melted her, poor girl. So I'm not sure after that if we didn't stop doing these sort of team briefings to see which way everybody was going to go. But as soon as you said that, I thought, gosh, yes, we certainly have something funny to discuss there. You mentioned the rider's mindset. Where does that mindset come from? Does that come from them inside? Does that come from somebody teaching them how to have it? I mean, everybody approaches it, as we've just said, differently. How do you come by the mindset?
Yeah, it's a big question, Lucinda. It's a huge question, because I think we use the word mindset to cover all manner of things and sins. So I've thought a lot about this over the year, because it's important in my mind that I'm clear what I mean by mindset, and also how I work with people's mindset, or else I get confused as well. To answer the question, so where does it come from? I mean, it comes from our earliest experiences. I think, of course, personality influences the way that we go about things. But what I've tried to do is to separate it, try to filter mindset from all the kind of things which are kind of unique and individual to us, because for me, that's where personality and stuff like that comes in. And try to understand it through what are the commonalities, the universal principles of mindset that you could say are true for any high performer, regardless of what their personality might be or their approach. And when you do that, it kind of comes down to what I've coined a sort of inside out or an outside in mindset. And although I'll explain what that is, it's very effective at explaining a number of behaviors. For example, it's effective at explaining how good we are at receiving feedback, our willingness to challenge ourselves, for example, and receive sort of challenging feedback, but also recognize what we've done well, which some people really struggle with. It's also other behaviors, success of other people. Rather than kind of feeling threatened by other people doing really well, what we notice is that people with what I call an inside out mindset tend to be inspired by other people. They want to learn, well, what are they doing that I could learn or that I could do better? They overcome obstacles more effectively. And of course, there are a lot of them in the equestrian world. So much better at being able to sort of overcome those obstacles and persist in the face of resistance. So there's a lot going on there. And basically what this inside out mindset is, it comes from this fundamental viewpoints that we are in control. That's the fundamental basis of it, that we can only control what we can control, that we have a process that we can trust and rely on, and we trust ourselves in that process as well. And of course, that largely comes from experience, but by making this stuff explicit, we can accelerate that experience in young people. And I really believe that, and would like to think that I've helped a lot of very young riders do that. By helping them develop their own blueprints, their own process, what works for them, and making it much more explicit, whether that means writing it down, deliberately practicing it in training, practicing their routines, and not just kind of showing up and seeing what happens. So the idea of an inside out mindset is kind of one whereby we focus on the little things really that we know make a difference, rather than necessarily the big outcome at the end of it, the big results, which might make us feel pressured, or we might have a degree of expectation towards achieving, rather than focusing on what other people think, rather than focusing on social media, stuff like that. The inside out mindset is strong because it's fundamentally, it can't be rocked by anything else. You know what your process is, you know what works for you. And so if you've invested in that stuff, if you trust in it and believe in it, then all this stuff around the periphery, the outside, you can manage that a lot more effectively. Does that kind of make sense, Lucinda?
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's love it. And that's the inside out. What's the outside in?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. See, I believe we're all born with an inside out mindset. The example I always use is playing in the garden with my brother.
Yeah.
And apologies if people have heard this story before, but it's the easiest way of getting the point across.
No, go.
It's a true story. My brother he was 2 years older than me, a very talented cricketer, and we used to play in the garden all the time. And he used to thrash me, to be honest, and he had no mercy whatsoever. So he'd bowl the ball as fast as he could, and he was a very fast bowler, and he'd get me out every time. One day, completely by accident, I hit the ball, and it went flying across the garden, landed underneath a bush. He went off to go and find it, and I was left there to think for the first time, how did I do that? I came to two conclusions. One is that I kept my eye on the ball, and the other is that I kept a straight bat. And from that point onwards, I just became obsessed with those two things because I knew that they worked. Now, did I beat my brother? No, not straight away. But I did start to hit the ball a little bit more often. And as I hit the ball more often, I started to gain confidence, and I started to be able to place the ball a little bit more. So all these other abilities kind of came through from having got these sort of foundation focuses, if you like, or foci. And so eventually it happened 1 year later, it probably was a year later, I did those two things well enough to hit the ball enough times, to score enough runs, to then eventually beat him. But that was a long process. It was a long, long process. Of course, he folded up his arms and said, I don't want to play this anymore. And we've never played cricket since. So my brother demonstrated the outside in mindset, which kind of suggests that his motivation, his energy came from the needs to win, the needs to kind of get results. Whereas for me, my definition of results was different, and it was much more internalized, is what we call it, say, in psychology. So we had an internalized view of what good looked and felt like, rather than one that was validated by the outside world. Now, of course, the two have to meet at some points. There's no point in me getting to the end of the day and thinking, well, today went brilliantly, I'm very happy, if every single time, I get poor scores and don't get the results. At some points, that has to translate, but it will do. And that's the whole point. So hopefully that kind of describes, and you know what, I think we all start with an inside out mindset. But what happens is that we tend to develop an outside in mindset as we start to get better. When you first started to ride a horse, you didn't care, but you didn't even think about winning a competition because that just wasn't on the radar at all. It was so far removed from what you were doing. But of course, as you got better at the foundation skills and then went to competition, you probably did brilliantly in your first few competitions because you didn't have the headspace to worry about what the judge was thinking and what everyone else was doing, because you were so focused on what you were there to do. And hopefully you were excited by that as well. So that's what we call beginner's mindset, or beginner's, people call it beginner's luck. There's nothing lucky about it. It's just the way that we're focused and prioritizing our attention. If we can maintain that beginner's focus, we would do very, very well. But the problem is that we do start to do well. Our results improve, they get better, and maybe even we start winning competitions. And at that point, there holds a kind of an expectation that we start to develop of ourselves, which makes us more aware of what's going on around us. It makes us more aware of what people are saying on social media, of what people might be expecting. Suddenly you get owners who are interested, and all these other people have expectations on you, even if you don't. So it becomes very difficult to maintain the sanctity of an inside-out mindset, even though when we do, amazing things happen.
Brilliant, golly, I love that. And that can sort of work in your favor for some people. Some people who have a mind that can go off in different directions are actually brought into a focus by the pressures of the outside pressures of owners, of social media, everything else. It almost can channel them into doing better. Whereas when they haven't got those sort of pressures, their mind wanders. I mean, I've certainly noticed that among some people. It is an interesting sort of reverse of what you would normally expect, because I love your description of what I would call beginner's luck. But it's so true. You're unmuddied by experience of life and competition. So you just get in there and you do your thing. And then gradually you do maybe well, maybe not so well, but gradually all the other things start to come, and they can disturb some people, and others, they can actually keep them focused and on the track, I find.
Have you ever found, Lucinda, that if someone is very intelligent, or they have a profession that has been determined or defined by their intelligence, they can sometimes struggle to manage their attention to make things as simple as perhaps they need to be. And in the equestrian world, there are lots of very, I guess because of the nature of the sport, there's lots of very talented people who are talented in their own right in other fields. So you might get lots of vets, for example, or surgeons, or people who kind of, they're used to that challenge, but it's always been an intellectual challenge. And of course, sports is it's as much a kinesthetic challenge. It's about physical intelligence, not just and feel, rather than intellectual IQ. And sometimes you can lean on one so much it almost undermines the other. I don't know if that's something you've kind of noticed. It
makes such sense, and I now want you to help me, regardless of everybody watching, because just occasionally I have to teach or help a brain surgeon. And they are unilaterally the most difficult people to help. They are, thank goodness, because they're in my head mending it, incredibly intelligent people. But when it comes to riding, they apply that immaculate attention to detail, which they need for what's going on in here, to what they're doing with their horse. And it doesn't work because there isn't the big picture feel anymore. It's tick, 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 tick. And sometimes I say, "You're not a brain surgeon, are you?" Yes. There's a problem.
Wow.
So, trying to help those sort of people is a complete opposite to trying to sort of get people to understand what I want them to do, because they're trying far, far too hard, because they are academically so intelligent. It's so interesting you should bring that up.
I do wonder whether they could. Maybe we could do this as an experiment with your brain surgeon, but I do believe there are always aspects of something like that, say for a surgeon, which could be very helpful to them, because surgeons must have feel to some regard. So I'm going to change the word feel for intuition.
Yeah.
They must rely hugely on intuition. But it's an intellectual intuition rather than a kinesthetic intuition. But even so, my wife and I are watching Grey's Anatomy at the moment, so hence surgeons are kind of it's on the mind. But I know there was this brilliant scene whereby one of the young intern surgeons was on this training course with the chief surgeon of the hospital, and they were getting very, very competitive because this young intern was, sort of cut and thrust, and they wanted to prove how good they were. And at the same time, the chief surgeon was under a bit of pressure, to be good at practicing this procedure that they were learning about. And when it came to test day, the intern had been beating the chief all the way up to test day. She'd been basically getting the results quicker than the chief surgeon had done. But on test day, everything changed. And the chief surgeon closed his eyes, and he did the whole procedure with his eyes closed, and he did it quickly and more efficiently than the intern did. And of course, it was putting the intern off. And they got to the end, and the intern was like, "How on earth did you do that?" He said, "Well, I had to teach my intuitions, which was actually a slower process. Hence, you were beating me for the last, however many attempts. But now that I can do it with my eyes closed, I know that I can do it intuitively, which means I'll be able to do it under pressure, and I'll be able to do it by feel rather than rely on step-by-step process, which of course horses don't necessarily respond very well to."
Yeah, that's
try that on your brain surgeon.
Well, exactly. Very much, exactly. I will.
But I mean, Lucinda, because feel's a massive thing for, we've whenever we've had these conversations, we've often sort of come back to this idea of feel, and it's such a non-tangible thing. We can intellectually, we can kind of write things down, step-by-step processes and routines, and that's great. But I do believe that psychology as the subject is partially responsible for teaching feel. And I believe that visualization is an example of a key tool that allows people to translate what they've learned in the saddle, or rather reinforce what they've learned in the saddle. Because one of the sports that I worked in was skeleton, the British skeleton team. And for me, the key story behind them, the most successful Winter Olympic team of all time. And what's fascinating is that we have no right in this country to be any good at that sport because we don't have any facilities in this country.
Just explain to us, Charlie, what skeleton is.
Yeah, so skeleton is basically where you career head first down an ice run down the mountain at about 90 miles an hour. You would have seen it on television, with your chin just an inch off the ground, going around corners, experiencing the same G-forces as a sort of fighter jet pilot might experience. So,
are you on something or just on
you're on what they call a sled. I'm not allowed to call it a tea-tray. It's a very expensive tea-tray made by McLaren in the British team.
Is it press to run type stuff?
Yeah, exactly that kind of stuff, but kind of professionalized. I found that the crest to run is very much a kind of, excuse the language, balls out experience where, it's just surviving it. Whereas, this is immaculate pinpoint accuracy in training people to be the very best in the world. And one of the challenges there is that because of the G-forces, athletes only get 2 runs per day, which equates to 1 minute 56 of training. Now, I've asked a lot of riders, if you could only spend 2 minutes a day in the saddle, what would you do differently? Now, I know it's a completely hypothetical question, but it really gets them thinking. And I love asking the junior squads this as well, because they come up with all the right answers, which is I would spend a lot more time preparing myself mentally before getting in the saddle. I would think about what I'm going to do before doing it, rather than relying on just getting in there and just kind of getting into it, or trial and error, which, let's face it, is a terrible approach to take with a horse. They said I'd probably, make sure that I analyze it better afterwards as well. So they were kind of doing all this, saying all the right answers. And for me, visualization becomes a really important part of that before and after, because we do only get so much time in the saddle. And in an ideal world, do you want to repeat a halt rein back 5 times to get it right on the 5th time? Or do you want to get it right the first time, ideally? Because that's exactly what we're talking about. And for me, it's mental processes that lead us to that scenario where we get it right the first time of asking, because we've tuned in to the feel, the nuances of the aids. And when hopefully, if we've done our breathing and we're nice and relaxed, we should be relaxed with it. So rather than get on and just doing it trial by error and getting it right on the 5th time, but getting it wrong 4 times for every time you get it right, for every time you get it right, it's using these mental processes to enhance and reinforce good feel. That's how I see it anyway.
You mentioned breathing.
Mm.
How does that help? What do you do?
So breathing is absolutely a fundamental core skill for human beings. And I'm going completely out of the realms of sports here as well. What we now know, it's interesting, because I've been writing about this for my book, in the second part of my book, which is called The Feeling Dimension. And the first skill that we have to teach people is how to breathe properly, which sounds bizarre because we've been doing it all our life and it's what keeps us alive. However, the pattern and the rhythm of our breathing is intrinsically related to other rhythms in our body, not least our heart rhythms. Now, the reason that matters is because our hearts should speed up and slow down about 5 to every minute. However, when we're incoherent, when we are negatively stressed or worried or anxious, that rhythm becomes completely disrupted. And the problem with that is that your heart and your brain talk to each other. There's a very complex feedback loop going on. And when your heart is beating irregularly, it effectively sends signals to the limbic system, the part of your brain, which effectively says, oh, something's up here, there's something wrong. And what that does is it induces our kind of fight or flight response, and it actually shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So that's the part here which is responsible for you being able to focus on something simple. So it starts to have this knock-on effects on fundamental functions like our ability to focus. So our breathing affects our heart rate affects our brain activity. But actually, I mean, it goes far more than that. It affects our intuition as well, and our ability to think clearly and access our intuition. And really, when it comes to breathing, it's not complicated, but it's a matter of just practicing deep diaphragmatic breathing and just relaxing on every out breath. And first thing is that we can actually do that on demand. And it might sound ridiculously simple, but next time you're at your computer doing emails, notice your breathing. Because when you go through emails or social media, if you scroll through social media, what I guarantee you will find is that you hold your breath. It's called an anticipation response. And the problem then is that because our breathing regulates our hearts, we start to anticipate, and that becomes an emotional thing rather than just a physiological thing. So we start to create emotions of kind of anxiety, confusion, incoherence, which are unhelpful to us at any point in time. So I'm always getting people to practice their breathing, but not just on the horse, in everyday activities in life. Notice your breathing. If you catch it when you're driving, for example, notice when you're breathing incorrectly, and just retrain yourself, recondition yourself to come back, even if it's just 3 deep breaths and then carry on. Just get into the habit of doing it, because it's the first part.
Very, very interesting. I've had a struggle lately too, because I picked up that you're meant to breathe through your nose when you're running, and I run a very, very short way every now and again. And after about 10 yards, I've got to breathe through my mouth. And
Yeah,
apparently you
yeah.
breathe, it's much healthier to breathe through your nose. Are you suggesting that we do our deep breathing through our nose?
Okay, so nasal breathing can enhance coherent states. So it can help us to, it can enhance the impact we're able to have on our heart rhythms and therefore our sort of states of coherence in the brain. However, it's not essential. When in sports, we have no choice but to breathe through our mouth when we're out of breath. If we're doing interval training, for example, it's the only way of getting enough oxygen in. Also, if we're doing what we might call activation breathing, like, really deep, but much more kind of aggressive breathing, and already just doing that once, I can feel a rush to my head. If we can do, but again, it's diaphragmatic. We've got always think of your lungs like triangles. Okay, you've got to fill up the bottom first and bring it all the way up to the top. So feel the air, feel the goodness of the air from the bottom all the way up through to your head. That actually activates our kind of our nervous system. So you have to do that through the mouth. So where people say, you've got to try and breathe in through the nose, it's helpful to do that when you're doing meditative breathing. So if you're sat practicing your breathing in a more meditative state, in a quiet room, maybe with music, and you're just practicing that and letting your mind go and just relaxing your mind, then yes, nasal breathing definitely helps. But when you're running along, you really don't, breathing through your mouth, you've got to get enough oxygen in.
Excellent. I'm loving all of this. I do hope everybody else is. I see this little bit of chat going on, which is lovely. But if anybody has any direct questions that they'd like to pop on the chat, we'll field them. But meanwhile, I'd just like you to glance over the sadly ever-present problem of depression, which seems to have gone through the roof since I was a teenager in early 20s, when I think there was one person that we knew that had depression, and we all felt incredibly sorry for her because none of us had a clue what it was, but she didn't seem to come over very easily or happily. And now it's such a scourge of so many people, and it's a huge subject, so I don't expect you to go into it with any depth, but I'd love what your opinion is as to why it is such a widespread problem now, when before you were born, it wasn't such a widespread problem.
Okay. Depression and anxiety, sadly, experienced a huge peak in 2012. And scientists kind of were interested, what on earth is going on? What happened in 2012? Of course, I always relate it to the London Olympics and one of the most amazing experiences, that I'll ever experience. But but unfortunately, it was also the year when social media became compatible with mobile technology, which gives us a scary indication about the impact that technology seems to have had on this experience of depression and anxiety. And I know depression and anxiety are kind of very often interrelated, although they are sort of different or experienced differently. Actually, they can often come from the same sources. And so I guess, what does that tell us as a starting point? It tells us that we've got to be able to manage our world, manage our bubble effectively if we're going to really overcome this. I do think that there is a strong sense of comparison that comes through what should we be doing. And even if you're not on social media all the time, we're still influenced by it through media and all sorts of technology. I always personally try to challenge common perceptions. Perceptions like, we're always, we should always be busy. People, it's almost wear it as a badge of honor. Busy, busy, busy. And I think actually, I don't give anyone credits for being busy. I try to actually, I try to sort of discombobulate their expectations when I actually take pride of the fact that I've spent periods of time not being busy, or I've been particularly lazy for a day or so, but deliberately lazy or deliberately disconnected. So I think it's challenging it's our life. We can choose what works for us, what doesn't. And I think we always have this kind of idea that what other people is doing is always right, and people will always tell you that they're doing the right thing. But actually, it's the typical inside-out mindset, right, which we're trying to achieve here. It's what works for you, and that's got to be as similar in life as it is for sports as well. There is also a strong link with mental health and focus. And it's a link that was, funnily enough, made more clear after the Christchurch earthquakes in New Zealand. So these devastating earthquakes, which affected the community there hugely, not least because of the hundreds of kind of aftershocks for days, weeks, and months afterwards. And Christchurch University did this really interesting study with the whole community that looked at people who had overcome that particular challenge effectively, and people who'd really struggled, for whom had kind of deteriorated, their mental health had deteriorated. And what they found was really interesting, that there was actually a complete spectrum of where people were. And in fact, some people had better mental health after the earthquakes. Get your head around that. They were more, and what they found was that the people who actually kind of were thriving were the ones who had found meaning and purpose, but that meaning and purpose had focused their minds. They were setting clearer goals for themselves, and just daily, everyday little goals. Whereas the people who struggled and kind of found themselves in a bit of spiral of poor mental health were the ones whose focus had completely deteriorated. I mean, to the point where they couldn't hold their attention on a single conversation from beginning to end. They couldn't order their usual cup of coffee. They couldn't keep meetings or appointments. So being able to sort of retrain our minds just to hold our focus on one thing for a period of time can be enormously beneficial. And hence the reason that things like meditation have become very valuable in the modern world. For me, it's important in sports. I talk more about applied meditation rather than meditation itself. It's all very well being able to kind of sit in a nice sort of lakeside glacial, lake in the mountains, with quiet music in the background. But actually, when we need that presence of mind and focus of attention the most is in busy, disruptive environments. So for me, we all have a long way to go to being able to sort of train those states.
I'm fascinated by that, having been in Christchurch not long after it, and it was absolutely devastating. And to hear that some people actually, it inspired them to live a better, more purposeful life. Is that because they realized how close they'd been to copying it?
Yeah, I think our sense of mortality can definitely,
that sense of mortality
focus the mind, can't it?
Oh my goodness, it can. Charlie, we've got 12 more minutes, and we've got a few questions that have popped up. So I'm gonna I don't know whether you can press chat on the bottom of your screen and have a look, but I'm gonna.
Yeah. No, I do actually have the chat box up, so I'm happy to kind of.
We'll have to try and keep these answers reasonably short, which is not easy because usually they're needing a bit more in order to get through the 3 or 4 we've got. When I ride across country, sometimes it takes my pony having a stop. Don't I know that one? Before I ride properly.
Oh yes. Oh, okay. Can I just pick up on that? Was there a question actually
The
before
question that this person rides across country and her pony has to have a stop quite often before she actually gets into gear and rides properly.
Yeah. Okay. So this came up with a show jumper years ago, to the point where this show, I kid you not, this show jumper's routine was to it sounds horrible, this, but bear with me, was to deliberately make their horse run out into the sort of side of the fence in order that they could sort of get the energy they needed to sort of butt themselves up and ride the horse properly. So that's what we call a maladaptive coping strategy, and a very extreme one at that. What you're talking about there is finding what we call an optimal state of mind to be at your best. And of course, your optimal state of mind is going to be very different going around a cross-country course to what it is going around a dressage test. And very often, riders can naturally either go around a dressage test or go around a cross-country course, but they find it hard to naturally find their optimal state for both. They have to work quite hard at one. You know, they're either too docile for the cross country or they're too hyped up for the dressage. So I think there are two. I have a 3-step process which should enable us to kind of find our optimal state. And it always starts with breathing and relaxation, because as the first 2 steps, they're actually important for any discipline in any sport. So having spent kind of practicing, a few minutes of deep breathing, then a few minutes of just actively focusing on just relaxing your seats, relaxing your muscles, but then visualization, and being able to use 2 things, visualization and active breathing, to be able to kind of get your heart rate up, get your blood up. But you could also sprint. I mean, I think I heard Sam Griffiths talk about this, but he would get off the horse and maybe kind of run around literally to get his heart rate up, because he knew that what was important is that he was in the optimal state for the horse. He couldn't afford to kind of drift into it when he was on the horse or wait for something to happen. So I'd say that, you can do deep breathing. And when I say that, it's not hyperventilating, okay? The difference between that and hyperventilating is that you're controlling that. But already just doing that twice, I can feel kind of the energy sort of coursing around my muscles. But you've got to combine that with control. So now you visualize exactly, what is my plan here? What am I trying to do on the horse? Go around the course of jumps in your head and get it right. Challenge yourself to get the perfect line, to get the perfect canter. Exaggerate, jump big. And so all of these little things can help us tune in to the challenge at hand. I probably, as a psychologist, spend more time upping the challenge in riders' heads than I do trying to sort of decrease that challenge and pressure. I want them to feel pressure, but in a positive way that they can control. So there's a physiological element and there's a mental element. Physiologically, we can run around, we can do deep breathing, but make sure you're relaxed as well. And deep active breathing, like I've just shown you. And mentally, we've got to be tuned into the task at hand. Okay, we need both of those things in order to sort of up our optimal state. Hopefully that's kind of helped answer your question.
Well, you've done very well, because there's quite a few questions here, which, as we're getting on towards our D-Day time, we're not going to probably answer each one, but most of them are going to take from what you've just said to help them. There's one interesting one here from Isabel. I'm sorry, Evie, I didn't mention your name when you asked a good question. And it talks about how fascinated Isabel is that she's heard Michael Ewing has a nap between riding 2 horses cross country at Badminton. How can this be possible? Well, I'm going to take the answer on this one, because that's exactly what I did too. And you're so tuned in to the horse that you've just been on, and you're full of adrenaline, and it may have gone really well, it may be a little bit disappointing, but whatever, you want to clear your mind, because that was that horse, and now you have to ride a completely different entity. You have to tune yourself into the fact that that's no longer the horse that did really well or disappointed you or you let down or whatever it might be. So I used to lie flat out, sometimes on the ramp of the horse box, sometimes across the driver's seat, wherever, and just clear my mind. How did you do that? I don't know, but I would often drop off, and it was wonderful. I remember my dad having to come and get me. Come on, wake up! You've got another horse to ride. So it is almost because I'm a go-y person. I'm not naturally a sort of person, and yet that was what I found. Nobody told me to do it. That was what I found I needed to do. Charlie, I don't know whether you've got any views on that.
I mean, what you described there, and I've heard a lot of. I mean, Pippa Funnell said the same thing, hasn't she? What always fascinates me, especially in the old form of 3-day eventing, it's a long competition, and you cannot be in the zone for 4 days even. And the whole period running up to that as well, when you're starting to kind of think about what you're there to do. And so what you described there, Lucinda, is a great example of compartmentalizing, of being able to put your focus in discrete boxes. And it takes practice, and it also takes trust, because the implication there, Lucinda, is that you trust that when you wake up and when you cross that next threshold, you will tune in to what you've got to do. And you will have all the time that you need to be able to prepare yourself mentally and physically to do the job. So I think compartmentalizing is the process in which we can put a sort of thresholds to our focus, and we can come down and recover from what we've just done. And that recovery, if we do it well, it will induce a very tired kind of response, which is perfectly okay. And if that means that you have a nap, even better, because you'll probably be managing your energy more efficiently for the long haul. But it also implies that when you wake up, and literally, I always encourage riders to have a point in time, and not just a point in time, but a moment when they physically start doing something that marks the beginning of tuning into the next bit. And just by knowing that and practicing that, they actually maintain the sanctity of having a bit of a recovery and a rest for however long it is. So hopefully that helps kind of add value to what Lucinda mentioned there and how you can achieve it yourself.
Terrific. And I was seeing somebody who's talking about visualization, and again, long before we knew of the existence of people to help us, sports psychologists or whatever, I developed a technique where I saw a film. In those days, it was a cine film, not a video, of my horse's ears and every single blade of grass and every tree and every fence for the whole 4 miles of whatever course, maybe it was badminton. If anybody disturbed me during that visualization, it was usually at that fence that I made a mess. So I was completely tuned in, and the ears were in front of me. Nothing went wrong. Everything went right. And that visualization was what took me onto the horse and took me around the course. I started to do it at night and used to fall asleep at a certain fence, and that would be the fence that I would mess up. So I never did it at night, apart from the fact that if I didn't fall asleep, I probably could never get to sleep, because now I got myself so wired. But just seeing every fence coming up and jumping it perfectly, because I'd already been through the drama of what do I do for plan B, C, D, if it goes wrong, da, 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 da. I'd done all that on the course book. That was planted, I hoped, in my computer. Now I just wanted to leave with an absolutely clear, positive visualization in my mind. And I think we probably have to draw to a close. So Charlie, we could happily, if you could bear it, have you again to keep discussing. But the one thing from my experience of doing this whole game that I've probably found most empowering, and something I only learned at my daughter's parents' day, when a wonderful girl called Deborah had rode the Atlantic single-handed. And I won't go through the story because we're running out of time, but what I learned from that was choose your attitude. It's incredibly empowering, and you can be very cross with somebody, but you can choose not to be. And it's so much nicer if you're not very cross with somebody. So it's a very empowering thing. And I've always loved talking to Charlie. It's been one of my treats when we go for tea somewhere and spoil ourselves with scones and cream. And we've just, I mean, ever since DOT, really, Charlie, I don't know how long you've been going now, 7, 8 years, maybe more.
Well, time flies. Time flies.
We've always had a lot in common, which has been so much fun. So thank you so much for giving
not at all
your advice. And if there's anything that you want to end with, I've ended with choose your attitude. It's very empowering.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second before you want to end, Charlie? I'd like to just bring everybody back on the screen so you can finish up, so we can see everybody. But everybody, this new layout that I've managed to find, when I come off of the spotlight, it's going to be stuck. You need to go up into your top right hand side, click the gallery view so you can see everybody again. It's just nice to see everyone. So I'm going to unspotlight Lucinda, and we've got Charlie there. So now if everybody can just go into their view and choose gallery, that should bring us all back. Can everybody see everybody now?
Well, we don't know if there's more than the amount that we've got on the screen and another screen.
Oh no, but no, they are that. We don't need to worry about that, Lucinda. We just have to make sure everyone can see everybody.
Okay.
But I mean, I've just been fascinated listening to Charlie and Lucinda. Thank you.
Can I just share something very quickly before we steer off? So I guess by more of a plug, actually, it's nothing specific. I mentioned about 10 to 10 if you're a coach, but I do also have a riders program on there called Win the Mind Game, which it sounds like a couple of you may have been through. So do visit 10 to 10 if you're interested in that, 10to10.com. However, I don't know the dates yet, but I am going to do a webinar on coming back stronger, because I'm just getting bombarded at the moment with people kind of asking about confidence coming back into competition. And it's such a huge talking point. And of course, being out of competition for such a long time will mean that a lot of people will go back with a lot of questions. They won't necessarily feel as confident. So I'm going to do a whole webinar based off that. I don't know when yet. I don't know the dates, but it'll probably be later in April, at the end of April. If you can just, if you're not already, just go on to Charlie Equestrian Psychology Coach on Facebook. And as long as you join me there, then I'll let you know about it.
This will be up in the hub, everybody, and I'll put all that information in the notes in the hub. So I'll just get everything from you, Charlie, and we'll pop it in there. So you'll be able to access it and link through. So it almost sounds like we know what we're doing, doesn't it?
Yes, well done, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
No problem.
Well, brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, Charlie. And your webinar sounds fascinating, but then everything you do, not only sounds but is fascinating, and we're very lucky as a sport, because I know you come from pentathlon, and interestingly we're up against our next month's mentor, who's Tick Maynard, who's a Charlie of horses. And when I told him that Tick was coming next month, he said, I don't believe it, we used to do pentathlon with each other. I said, did you beat him? He said, of course. So Charlie is already a very high level competitor in pentathlon and has so much to offer, not just the horse world, but we're very lucky that he does major quite a lot of his time on the horse world. So huge thanks, Charlie.
So Tick's a great guy as well. So
yes.
Yeah, I might drop in on that myself.
Oh, you could. We'll very happily have you. You can pull a fast one on him.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming. I see Kenia there. I see Sharon from Yorkshire. I see quite a few familiar faces. Many thanks. And thank you, Rachel. Great job.
Pleasure. So if everybody doesn't mind dropping out, because I just want to have a quick chat with Lucinda and Charlie at the end. Promise we won't talk about you all. So we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye. Look at them all.